The moment was supposed to be funny. Everyone was laughing. Steve Harvey was laughing. The audience was roaring. It was just another question on Family Feud, just another typical Tuesday afternoon taping. Until it wasn't. Until a father gave an answer that made Steve Harvey stop mid-joke, his smile frozen, his hand reaching instinctively toward his chest. The entire studio went silent. Not the awkward kind of silence. The kind that happens when something sacred enters a room. When laughter dies because truth has just walked through the door uninvited. What happened next wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. And it became one of the most powerful moments in game show history. The game had been going smoothly. The Johnson family from Ohio was facing off against the Martinez family from Texas. Standard setup. 5 family members on each side. Steve doing his thing, the quick wit, the raised eyebrows, the comedic pauses that had made him a household name. The board showed a simple question. Name something a father teaches his children. Easy question. Wholesome answers. Riding a bike. Tying shoes. How to drive. The kind of feel-good content that makes Family Feud perfect family viewing. The Martinez family had already given 3 answers. All on the board. The audience was energized, clapping along, the energy exactly what you'd expect from a game show audience on a winning streak. Then it was the Johnson family's turn. And Michael Johnson, the father, stepped up to the microphone. He was a man in his early 40s. Average height. Wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing remarkable about his appearance. He looked like 10,000 other dads who'd stood at that podium over the years. But when Steve Harvey asked him for his answer, something shifted in his eyes. A hesitation. A flicker of something deeper. How to grieve, Michael said quietly. Steve stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. The answer wasn't on the board. That much was obvious. But it was the way he said it. The weight behind those 2 words. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of episodes, who had heard every kind of answer imaginable, felt it immediately. This wasn't a joke answer. This wasn't someone playing for laughs. This was something real. Steve's expression changed. The showman mask dropped. He looked at Michael, really looked at him, and in that instant, you could see the calculation happening behind Steve's eyes. Keep the show moving? Or stop everything? He stopped everything. Hold on, Steve said, his voice different now. Quieter. More careful. He walked away from his podium, microphone still in hand, and moved closer to Michael. Say that again? Michael swallowed hard. His family behind him exchanged glances. His wife reached out, her hand touching his shoulder. How to grieve, he repeated. Because that's what I had to teach my children. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. You could hear the air conditioning. You could hear someone's phone vibrate 3 rows back. That's how quiet it got. Steve nodded slowly. He didn't look at the producers. Didn't glance at the cameras. He just stood there, feet from Michael, giving him space and attention in equal measure. You want to talk about it? Steve asked. Not as a host. As a human being. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked down at the podium, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge. His wife whispered something, but he shook his head. When he looked back up, his eyes were red. My son, Michael began, and his voice cracked. He stopped. Breathed. Started again. My son Dylan. He was 8 years old. Brain cancer. We lost him 14 months ago. The studio existed in a different dimension now. Time worked differently. The bright lights, the colorful set, the game board, all of it felt surreal against the reality of what had just been said. Steve Harvey closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, they were glistening. I'm so sorry, Steve said, and the way he said it, you knew he meant every syllable. I'm so sorry. Michael nodded, unable to speak for a moment. His teenage daughter, standing behind him on the podium, was crying openly now. His wife had both hands over her mouth. Even the Martinez family, the opponents, had forgotten about the game. One of them was wiping tears away. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He set his blue cards down. The cards with all the questions, all the scripted moments, all the show's carefully planned rhythm. He set them on the podium and walked fully into Michael's space. Not as Steve Harvey the comedian. Not as Steve Harvey the TV host. As Steve Harvey the father. As Steve Harvey the man who understood that some moments matter more than entertainment. "How old are your other children?" Steve asked gently. 15 and 12, Michael said. "My daughter Emily, she's 15. And my son Jacob, he's 12. They're right here." He gestured behind him, and Steve looked at them both, really saw them, acknowledged their presence with a nod that said, "I see your pain too." "And you had to teach them how to grieve," Steve said, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. "You had to be strong enough to fall apart. To show them it's okay to feel it all." Michael's composure finally broke. Not dramatically. Not with sobs. Just tears, silent and heavy, running down his face. "I didn't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you teach your kids to say goodbye to their little brother? How do you tell them it's okay when nothing's okay?" Steve reached out and gripped Michael's shoulder. Firm. Solid. The kind of touch that says you're not alone. "You did it by doing it," Steve said. "By showing up every day. By letting them see you hurt. By letting them know their pain was valid because yours was too. That's not just teaching them to grieve, brother. That's teaching them to be human." The audience was completely silent. Some were crying. Others sat with hands clasped, bearing witness to something too real for television yet somehow perfect for it. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was church. This was therapy. This was two fathers standing in truth. Steve looked back at the Johnson family, at Emily and Jacob standing there, at Michael's wife whose name, we'd later learn, was Sarah. He looked at them like they were the only people in the room. "I want you all to know something," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion. "What your husband, what your father did keeping your family together after something like that. That takes a kind of strength most people will never understand. And Dylan?" Steve's voice caught. "Dylan's watching. I believe that. And he's proud of his daddy." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Emily grabbed her brother Jacob's hand. Michael just stood there, shoulders shaking slightly, trying to hold it together and failing and somehow succeeding at the same time. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Steve Harvey took off his jacket. His beautiful, tailored, light blue suit jacket. The one that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He took it off, folded it carefully, and handed it to Michael. The gesture made no logical sense. It was completely outside any protocol, any script, any expectation. But it made perfect emotional sense. It was Steve saying without words, "I'm giving you something of mine because you've given us something of yours. Your vulnerability. Your truth. Your pain." Michael looked at the jacket, confused. "Steve, I can't." "Yes, you can," Steve interrupted firmly. "That jacket is custom made. Had it tailored specifically for today's show. But you know what? You need it more than I do. When you wear it, I want you to remember that you're not just Michael Johnson, father who lost a son. You're Michael Johnson, father who taught his children how to love through grief. How to keep living when life breaks you. That jacket's a reminder that you're stronger than you know." Michael took the jacket with trembling hands. He held it against his chest, and for a moment, everyone thought he might collapse. But he didn't. He stood there, holding this bizarre, beautiful gift, and something changed in his face. Not happiness. Not even peace. But recognition. Recognition that he'd been seen. That his pain mattered. That Dylan mattered. Steve turned to Emily and Jacob. "Come here," he said, and they came around the podium, shy, uncertain. He got down on one knee so he was at their level. "I know I'm not your dad," he said to them. "I'm not trying to replace anybody or fix anything. But I want you to know that what you're doing, surviving this, showing up, being there for your parents, that's hero stuff. You're not just kids who lost a brother. You're warriors who chose love over bitterness. And that?" He pointed to each of them. "That's everything." Jacob, the 12-year-old, broke. Just completely broke. Steve pulled him into a hug, and the boys sobbed into his shoulder. Emily joined, then Michael, then Sarah. The entire Johnson family clustered together in the middle of the Family Feud stage, held together by this comedian-turned-minister, this entertainer-turned-healer. The Martinez family did something then that the producers definitely didn't expect. They walked across the stage. All 5 of them. They came to the Johnson family and just stood there with them. No words. Just presence. Just humanity. The game forgotten. The competition dissolved. Just people being people in the face of profound loss. The audience was standing now. Not cheering. Not applauding. Just standing. Bearing witness. Some were praying. Many were crying. All were changed. When the families finally separated, Steve wiped his eyes with his bare hands. He looked at the cameras, at America watching from home. "We're going to take a break," he said. "And when we come back, we're going to finish this game. Because that's what the Johnsons are teaching us. You don't stop. You keep going. You keep playing. You keep living. Even when it hurts." During the commercial break, something extraordinary happened. The crew, the cameramen, the producers, the other staff members, they came onto the stage. They hugged the Johnsons. They shared their own stories of loss. The makeup artist talked about losing her mother. A cameraman spoke about his stillborn daughter. The set designer mentioned his brother who died in Afghanistan. The Johnsons had cracked something open, and grief poured out from everywhere. Steve stayed with them the whole time. He didn't go to his dressing room. Didn't check his phone. He sat on the stage floor, his expensive dress pants on the game show carpet, and he listened. He asked questions. He remembered names. He was fully, completely present. When filming resumed, the energy had shifted. The game continued, but it was different. Lighter somehow, despite the heaviness of what had been shared. Or maybe lighter because of it. The Johnsons ended up losing. The Martinez family won the game. But at the end, when Steve was shaking hands, Maria Martinez, the mother of the winning family, pulled Sarah Johnson aside. "We're donating our winnings," she said quietly, "to childhood cancer research. In Dylan's name." Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears flowing again, and hugged this woman she'd met an hour ago and would now never forget. The episode aired 3 weeks later. The producers debated heavily about including the moment. Some argued it was too raw, too real for daytime television. Others insisted it was exactly what television needed. Steve Harvey made the final call: air it all. Every moment. Every tear. Every second of authentic human connection. The response was overwhelming. The show received over 50,000 messages in the first week. Letters. Emails. Social media posts. People sharing their own losses. Their own grief journeys. Their own moments of having to teach their children the unteachable. The Johnsons were invited to speak at grief counseling centers. Michael started a support group for fathers who'd lost children. Emily began volunteering at a children's hospital. Jacob wrote an essay about his brother that won a national writing competition. And Steve Harvey? He kept that episode close. In interviews afterward, he called it the most important thing he'd ever done on television. "I've made people laugh for decades," he said. "But that day, I got to help people feel seen in their pain. And that matters more than any punchline I've ever delivered." The jacket became legendary in its own way. Michael wore it to Dylan's memorial service on the first anniversary of his death. He wore it when he gave his first speech at a grief support group. He wore it to Emily's high school graduation and to Jacob's 8th grade ceremony. In every photo, You can see it, that light blue jacket, slightly too big, worn with pride and pain and purpose. 3 years after the episode aired, the Johnsons returned to Family Feud. Steve brought them back, not to play, but to share their journey. Michael stood at that same podium and talked about how that moment, that inexplicable decision by Steve to stop the show and honor their pain, had changed their family's trajectory. How it had given them permission to grieve publicly. How it had connected them to thousands of other families walking the same dark road. "You gave us something that day," Michael said to Steve, his voice steady now, stronger. "You gave us the gift of being seen, of having our pain acknowledged, of knowing that Dylan's life mattered beyond our family. And that changed everything." Steve embraced him again. No words needed. Just two fathers who understood that some losses never heal, they just become part of who you are. The jacket still hangs in Michael's closet. A reminder that on the worst days, when grief feels unbearable, a stranger became a brother. And a game show became a sanctuary. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten.